I want to introduce the now Dr. Phillip Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Pibocip. Recently earned his PhD in Theology and Leadership, and has published articles relating to micronational sovereignty and leadership. He's given presentations based on these articles at the past 3 MicroCons. Today, Phillip will be revisiting these themes of micronational sovereignty from a philosophical perspective. So please come on up.
Why not? Thank you all so much. Thank you, Emperor Eric, for this opportunity. Thank you all. The sovereignty of micronations and micronational sovereignty is something that, for those of you who have been to MicroCon before, something that I have spoken about a lot, 2019, 2022, 2023, and this year. So in a way, I'm kind of rehashing some ideas, but a lot of this that I'm rehashing is in a response to an email I received at the end of 2023. I have an academia account, and so my articles that are published are on there, and different scholars can email each other about their work. And so I received this email. It's a long email. I'm not going to read it to you, but the author of this email essentially said, well, these are all really interesting thoughts concerning sovereignty, especially, the Prince Phillip J liver, which is now defunct. These are all really neat and everything, but it's not really real. It's not really sovereign. And in a way, okay, so this is the Achilles heel of micronationalism, right? We're not fully sovereign, but I don't think that this invalidates micronational sovereignty, because we might see, as we look around the macronational community, we can ask the same question of quote-unquote real countries, or we call the macro nations. And so we can ask ourselves again, what does it mean to be sovereign? To be independent? Is independence the same as sovereignty? Is freedom the same as sovereignty? Is power the same as sovereignty? And while all of these different ideas play into the dynamics of these definitions of different ideas of sovereignty, power, authority, a high school textbook's definition of sovereignty is to have the supreme power within one's territory and is neither subordinate or responsible to any other authority. And so this person's emailed me, said, well, if the Prince of Hut River murdered somebody, I think you'd go to prison. Well, yeah, of course, you should. I think you can make the same argument that if there's a problem in a smaller macro nation, I think that the larger macronational community will crack down and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be, committing a genocide, or hey, maybe you shouldn't be having a totalitarian government. And so we see this also in the macronational community too, or at least we should see some international backlash when leaders of macronational states don't do what they should do. So this high school textbook continues, says that every state is sovereign and it has supreme and absolute power within its own territory and decides its own foreign and domestic policies, neither subordinate nor responsible to any other authority. Okay, fair. But does every sovereign state do this? And the reality is, as we look around the macronational community, we look around our world, the answer is no. And we have what we might call de jure or legal sovereignty and de facto sovereignty. And we might see that there are many sovereign macronational countries that don't necessarily act as independent or as sovereign or as powerful as their counterparts that are larger might. Liechtenstein, Nauru, Monaco, the Vatican, San Marino, while they are legally sovereign states, they're not as powerful as, say, United States, Russia, China, Canada. And the reality is, you can see there is a power imbalance. Whether right or wrong or indifferent, it doesn't matter, but that is the reality. Sovereignty is not equal in the macronational world. So, as a matter of fact, many of these less powerful countries look to the more powerful countries for help in enforcing their laws. The Vatican uses aid from Italy to enforce their laws and to do customs and pilgrimages, especially during the Jubilee year. Monaco is under France's protection. Nauru is under Australia's protection. And so even the enforcement of laws, protection, sovereignty is guaranteed by other more powerful macro-states. Again, underscoring this power imbalance. And so I like to revisit this idea of macronational sovereignty. And by this point, I fear it's been boiled down to a, oh yeah, well guess what, kind of arguments, So even if our micronations depend on power, utilities, and resources from other macro states, oh yeah, so does Italy and Monaco, and I think San Marino to some extent. And they might say, oh yeah, well, your passports, are they really valid? Well, there are some of the least most valid passports of any macro state. Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq being the most notable. They might say, yeah, well, is your money valid? Oh yeah? Well, the Zambian dollar is one of the least valuable currencies. And so, not to boil it down to a, oh yeah, well, kind of arguments, I think that we can reiterate the importance of these power imbalances that do happen at a macro level, and in a way, our micronational claims help raise awareness to these issues. Okay, well, they might not recognize our borders. You can read any of my articles published on micronational and see that there are many macronational border disputes. They might not recognize our government. There's a lot of unrecognized governments around the world. They might not recognize our passports. A lot of unrecognized passports. They might not recognize our territorial claims. There's a lot of macro states who don't have recognized territorial claims. And so the argument for this is twofold. One, sovereignty is not as clear-cut, because if you want to apply this definition of sovereignty equally to all macro and micro states, you'll see that it isn't the reality. Less powerful nations depend on more powerful nations at the global level. Our micronations do depend on our macronational state that surrounds us for electricity, power, utilities. But that doesn't invalidate our claims. They might not recognize our borders, but border disputes don't invalidate macronational states. They might not recognize our passports, but passport power doesn't invalidate your country. So I think what it comes down to in reality then is that for our micronations, depending on other entities, might not be fully recognized, might not having recognized borders or recognized currencies, doesn't invalidate our claims. If anything, I think that it validates our claims, because you can't apply the definition of sovereignty equally. Because then countries like Nauru, Liechtenstein, Monaco, the Vatican, San Marino, they couldn't cut it. You wouldn't have a military for them. They'd have to establish their own power plants, their own wastewater treatment plants, and it wouldn't work. Even in larger countries, the power balance is still inequitable. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong or indifferent, but that is the contextual reality. And so I think that these important things to consider is that when we look around the world, our claims are not invalidated by legalities. If anything, the pressure of these legalities validates our claims. That if we say, okay, well, these things aren't real, well, if you try to apply these same rules to any given macro state, they're not always real either, or they're not equitably or equally enforced. So I think it comes down to then is that given these realities, war threatens macronational sovereignty, whose low economic power, while these can be major problems to macro states, understanding these implications of sovereignty, we can ask ourselves, what lessons can we learn and in what ways can we avoid making these own mistakes, both at the macro and micronational level? And so I think this is an opportunity for us to ask a very important question. How can a micronation or micronations together explicitly express sovereignty, even if limited on a day-to-day basis? States should ultimately be considered entities in which citizens obtain the common good. And a functioning government, to any extent, some of the great political philosophers say, a good state is a state in which people's needs are met. And we look around the world, and this is not always the reality, given the poor nations of the world. But given the two previous presenters, we see that there's many micronations that help with the common good in their own ways, through charities, through works of common good, through friendship, through achievement, through belonging, through charities. And so as long as I think our micronations help contribute to the common good, we are exercising sovereignty. We're exercising the power or the authority invested, entrusted, given to us by our micronational friends and allies to work for the common good, to work with the other micronations and macronations to help each other. Because ultimately, I think that given these realities of the macronational community, of war, famine, mutual aid, protectorates, etc., I don't think that our current context of the world invalidate our micronational claims of sovereignty. So what, they don't recognize our passports and money? There's lots of passports and money that aren't recognized. But rather, our micronational claims raise important awareness and ask important questions to our current context. Because the reality is, there are many people who don't have a passport at all, who don't have money, or it's not of any use, or that because of these border disputes can't access medical assistance, banks, or anything of the common good because of these huge border disputes, or because of in-functioning governments don't have access to the common good. And those are the signs of the times. So instead of saying that it invalidates us, rather, perhaps these realities validate our micronational claims when we can use our micronations not just to raise awareness, but perhaps to help make a difference in these global realities. And so the thought I leave you with is, in what ways, I think it's the same that the presenters before me asked the same questions. In what ways can our micronations serve the common good, both at a micro and macronational level, so that whatever definition of sovereignty, or however we apply it, everyone may have access to the common good? Thank you.